Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining. I'm Dr. Jessica DeVinto. I'm a clinical and consulting psychologist and YouTube's chief mental health advisor. I also happen to specialize in chronic complex childhood trauma, which is going to help inform our discussion today. So today we're going to talk about Cracked Up, which is a documentary that focuses on the impact and adverse childhood experiences and the impact that can have across a lifetime. And it follows the life story of Darrell Hammond, who I'll introduce in just a moment. Behind the scenes, Hammond suffered from flashbacks, self-injury, and addiction until he came to understand the role that early trauma played in his development. In this documentary, Cracked Up, it creates an inspiring balance between comedy and tragedy, helping us to understand the effects childhood trauma has in a new light, and it also breaks down the barriers around stigma and shame and helps with compassion and hope for those who've been traumatized. So before I introduce our guest today, I will say for more information about the film and access to the movie Cracked Up, the Evolving Conversation series, please go to crackedupmovie.com, crackedupmovie.com. So first, I will introduce, who needs no introduction, Darrell Hammond, an American actor, stand-up comedian, and impressionist. He is one of the longest running cast members on Saturday Night Live and has played famous characters, including many presidents, Bill Clinton, Ronald Reagan, George Bush, and more. Also, my favorite role that he played was Sean Connery. He's the author of the New York Times bestseller, God, If You're Not Up There, I'm Fucked, which was just released as an audiobook on audible.com, which he narrated himself. So please check that out. Next up, I'm going to introduce the director, Michelle Esrick, an award-winning filmmaker. In addition to this film, she has also directed and produced the wavy gravy movie, Saint Misbehavin', which the New York Times hailed as an unabashed love letter to the world that defies the cynicism of our age. Beautiful quote. Additionally, she executive produced the Netflix original film, Ram Dass Going Home, which was shortlisted for a 2017 Academy Award. And in 2018, she directed Let's Rise, a music video CNN dubbed the March for Our Lives movement anthem. In addition, both Michelle and Darrell are mental health and trauma activists. Appearing before Congress, Esrick and Hammond presented 9 trauma-informed care provisions, which were added into the Support for Patients and Communities Act, signed into law recently in October 2018. And our final guest is Dr. Basil van der Kolk, who has spent his career studying how children and adults adapt to traumatic experiences. In 1984, he set up one of the first clinical research centers in the U.S. dedicated to the study and treatment of traumatic stress in civilian populations. Much of his research has focused on how trauma has had different impact at different stages of development, and that disruptions in caregiving systems and additional deleterious effects that need to be addressed for effective intervention. I certainly have learned so much from his work personally as a psychologist. My favorite book of his is The Body Keeps the Score. Please check that out if you are interested in learning more. So now, before we jump into the panel questions, we're going to run a trailer for the show, for the documentary, excuse me.
A psychiatrist, I think it was number 11, said that I was a manic depressive.
You are schizophrenic.
I might be a multiple personality.
9 psychiatric facilities, including lockdown.
Well, I'll just give him these pills.
He goes, well, let's face it, you are a nut. He made me laugh. He's like, I'm joking with you because you're not any of these things. You are this way because of something that happened to you.
You know him. He's the longest running cast member in Saturday Night Live history. Give it up for Darrell Hammond, everybody.
I used to drink absinthe in this enormous bar called Mexico.
He was masterful. He knew what he was doing up there. He had a clear sort of style and point of view, and it was really funny.
If you would only take your clothes off and let me see you naked, there would be no more racism.
I'm in another ambulance, you know, they're like, there's the guy on TV. I mean, well, Jesus, don't take any chances with this guy.
You're an alcoholic, you're a drug addict. Oh, and by the way, surprise, surprise, you have trauma.
They looked at my brain once. The left side of my brain was dark. The right side of my brain was Times Square.
He knew some bad stuff happened to him when he was a kid, but only in flashes and bursts.
One time I went to the hospital when I was, I guess, 6 years old. And the doctor came out and he said, Miss Hammond, why is your son bleeding on the inside of his stomach? And my mom said, I don't know. I have no idea.
Something's happening in this house. I can't protect myself. You're an adult. Do something.
The worst crime is being expected not to tell.
Namaste.
What does that mean? The divine in me salutes the divine in you. Do you think there is such a place?
Thank you. Thank you for showing that. Thank you all for helping make this very important story to tell. Just take a breath for a moment as we start to dive in. Michelle, what inspired you to make this film, and how did you come up with the title Cracked Up?
What inspired me to make the film was Darrell, his story. One day, he said something to me that inspired me to make the film, this film. He said, my doctor told me not to call what I have a mental illness. He said, I want you to call it a mental injury. And I wanted to make a film about that because that affected me personally. I felt this wave of compassion come over me, and I literally felt it and saw it go out to the rest of the world. If I could let everybody know that there is a major biological component to trauma. And I didn't have the language until he said that. And I read Bessel's book, The Body Keeps the Score, and I got my hands on all this research about how trauma lives in the body and how it rewires the developing brain as a child, and that I wasn't a bad person and I wasn't a jerk, and what I was having throughout my life, because I'm a trauma survivor, I was having stress responses. My limbic system was going off, and I didn't know any of this. And so I wanted to let people know, because it helped me immediately just understand what was wrong with me, but actually nothing was wrong with me. It actually helped me understand that something happened to me, and it rewired my brain, and it set up my system to be deregulated. And that I just wanted to let everybody know that. And it seems to be such a relief when people understand that this is a mental injury, not a mental illness.
So it sounds like it was certainly part of healing for your own process as a trauma survivor, as well as in making the film.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
100%.
And Darrell, what was it like to tell your trauma story on film?
I mean, it took place over such a long period of time. After a while, it was just part of my life, being interviewed by Michelle and going to various places, and I never really thought of it in terms of what it would look like in a film anymore, or what it was like. I think that Michelle convinced me that people could get helped by this film.
That's amazing. And certainly it's already had such a huge impact and will continue to do so.
Well, I'm told it gets quite a whirl on Netflix.
Yeah. I mean, it had a big impact on myself even. And I'm also a trauma survivor and have treated trauma for over a decade. And still, I learned so much, not only about trauma, but about myself in the film. So I can say thank you to all of you for sharing your story, for making the film. And of course, Basil, for participating and sharing your expertise in this.
You know, it's just that vain effort to want somehow make it that all that stuff didn't happen to me for no reason. That it didn't happen for no reason. I mean, that became so incredibly important to me, that it didn't happen for no reason. I just couldn't accept that, you know. I wrote the book, and they said the book might help a couple of people, and I've had people come up to me and tell me I saved their kid's life, and I've seen young people with their moms and dads and showing me the scars on their arms, and it's not me, it's my story. And I had the money at the time to go to these great doctors. I mean, let's face it. If I don't have SNL backup, I couldn't have met all these doctors. So I just started sharing their words. And another part of me just really wanted to catch bad guys because I'm interested in that. I've always been sort of upset when you see the guy goes in and he shoots up a theater, he shoots a bunch of people he never met, and then you cuff him and you take him to jail. But how about the one that created him? How about the place he came from? There's always an antecedent. Always. I think when that kid that shot up was at Sandy Springs or the school. Mm-hmm. I mean, the first thing he did was shoot his mom. Make sure that was out of the way, and then let me go over there and do that. I wanted to catch bad guys as well, and to me that I wanted to convince people, or at least people think about the idea that the really bad guys are hiding in the light, right beside you. Yeah. They cut lawns and pay taxes and coach Little League, and they go to church services.
What you're reminding me, which I'm going to ask now instead of later on, is this concept of intergenerational trauma, which was acknowledged in the film, also known as transgenerational trauma. And it's basically how trauma is transmitted from one generation to the next. And later generations are also traumatized, and the cycle continues. Dr. Vanderkolk, can you please explain why this happens?
Well, people live with the residue of trauma, and that's their world. So if you have been hit and abused, you think that's what people do. And you also may not know what it's like to treat somebody like a vulnerable person. And so when you have a kid who reminds you of or helps you feel, you may become very angry with that child because it reminds you about how helpless you may have been at some points. And we get triggered all the time to these feelings that come from the past. And raising a kid is very hard and very complex, and you need a lot of help. And if you do it by yourself, it's very likely that some of these triggers will come out and prevent you being there for that kid.
And so with that, and this question is really for any of you, how do we break that cycle of trauma?
Consciousness, becoming aware and telling the truth. And of course, it's very hard to tell the truth because the truth is so awful. What happened to Darrell? Nobody wants to say to people, my mom deliberately tortured me. So you try to push it out of your mind. And because it means that you must have been a bad kid because somebody did this to you. Because if you had been a good kid, nobody would have done this to you. So it always becomes part of who you are. This must have happened to me because I was terrible. And so trauma leads to a real need to push things away and say, no, it didn't happen. It wasn't so bad. And not until you're able to really acknowledge what happened, it's likely that your body will continue to respond as if you're back there, and you'll react in ways that don't make any sense to yourself or any people, because that back of your brain is sort of an animal little brain that's into survival. And if you survive by hitting, you may hit again, or if you survive by freezing, you may freeze again. And you really need to go into yourself and to really know what happened to you and what has made you into the person you are, and make some decisions about who you want to be, what sort of life you want to create for yourself.
So turning and facing the pain and facing those dark corners.
Yeah. Understanding. I mean, that's why we made the film, to help understand trauma. And I know that I have this system that's deregulated. And when I get triggered, if I get upset, right? And so I call it triggered. We call it triggered. I go somewhere, I calm my system down so that I'm not reenacting what was done to me. And I'm not taking my my anger and what's happening in my brain, my system, and I'm not perpetuating that onto my current relationships. So it's self-healing that I can really break the cycle of trauma. Mm-hmm. In the film, you know, there's a scene in the film, you know, where Darrell describes a dream that he had about his mother, you know, as a baby, and that, you know, she was born an innocent baby, and that somehow he realized something happened to her. Mm-hmm. When I realized that something happened to my perpetrators, it's still horrible, and I still want them to be held accountable. But at the same time, that's the first time I realized it wasn't really about me. It wasn't really personal, that they were reenacting what had happened to them.
What I'm hearing you say, Michelle, the first part of that is, you know, some people think about trauma as power being taken away from an individual, and you're taking the power back in order to make a conscious choice moving forward and externalizing the responsibility for it. Because, of course, there's the victims of trauma. There's no responsibility that lies with them, certainly.
Yeah, and nobody talks about taking your power back more beautifully than Darrell.
Yes.
Oh.
And
when talks about when you become, you know, Darrell, when you talk about how when you become more powerful than your perpetrator.
Yeah.
And how there's nothing greater than that.
Yeah, but then you have to ask yourself, am I going to act like the perp?
Yeah.
Am I going to do to the perp what the perp did to me? Am I going to be a violent criminal? Am I going to commit crimes against nature, against them? You know, I can tell this story another time, but Michelle knows the story of the gangster that I used to know. And everyone said he was a gangster. He was. And I'm not going to tell the whole story, but basically someone had insulted me. I was getting drunk. I had a plan to go hit the guy. And I don't even know how to make a fist, right? But I was going to hit this guy. And if my hands didn't work, I was going to hit him with a lamp. That's what I said. And the gangster, I mean, it was broken English. It wasn't grammatically correct, but he basically let me know that revenge is a trap, and the idea that you're going to make yourself feel better by committing the same offense is just wrong. You know, that the penitentiaries are full of people who thought they'd make themselves feel better by hitting the guy over the head with a bottle after he kissed his wife cheated on him. Then you go to the penitentiary and you still feel bad. So you're sort of filled at times with a sense of, you know, they did the crime and I'm doing the time. I'm the one that has to learn all this shit. You know, I'm the one that has to read all these books.
It's hard work.
I mean, this has been going on for a long, long time, and there's still more to learn. You know, but I have a book over here about Gary Gilmore, who was the subject of a book a movie called Executioner's Song, who viciously, brutally slayed some people. And I remember being in the middle of the book and being so disheartened to learn that Gary Gilmore was really not created in this century. He was created in centuries and centuries ago in Hungary, where all of this started. And it, you know, when I get to heaven, there's a couple of first things I want to say to God. And the first one is, why don't bad guys think they're bad guys? That's number one. But the second one is, how come you didn't hit me with a handbook when I came out of my house at the age of 18, God? Have someone come up to me and go, Darrell, I just want to let you know you're going to model on a minor level what happened in that house. So you have this dad whose anger is more important to him than his children, than the rest of his world. You're going to model that on a minor level. And, you know, sort of give me a sense of how I was going to live my life. But I modeled what I saw as a kid, you know, not all the way, but part of the way. And I get older and I'm trying to mate and I'm trying to date people and I'm going to be married like the rest of the human race. They doing normal things, and it always blew up in my face because the truth is, I never saw anyone love anyone equally.
There was no model.
I never saw anyone tell the truth when they had done something wrong.
Right.
I never saw anyone tell the truth at all.
Right. Or apologize.
Go, gee, I shouldn't have done that.
Right.
So when I got older, and this is part of why I wanted to make this film, was the rage that I lived with my whole life was that, those two people knew what had happened while I was going through 25 shrinks, 40 shrinks. There were two people that already knew what had happened, and they wouldn't tell me,
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, well, I'm just going to write a New York Times bestseller, and me and my friend are going to make a film, and it's going to be translated into 5 languages. How about that?
I love it. There's a quote that some psychologists lean on. That's people are doing the best they can with the resources and the information they have at any given time. And that's coming up for me now. And thinking about trauma in that context. And I think something that would ground us is also thinking through how we're really defining trauma here today. Dr. Vanderkolk, you define trauma so beautifully in the film. And I'm hoping you wouldn't mind sharing that with us today as well.
Well, I think a trauma is an experience that leaves you at a loss for solutions. It leaves you, it's so horrible that you just sit there unable to do anything. And so it overwhelms the capacity of your mind and your brain to deal. And then all kind of stuff happens. You forget it. You push it away. But your body, the back of your brain, which is the animal survival brain, keeps reacting automatically as you're still in danger, even though your frontal lobe, your conscious self, says, it didn't happen to me. I had a perfectly happy childhood. My mom really loved me. So a little odd, but nothing happened. So people really work on normalizing everything, on going on with their lives. People want to live, and people do the best they can to live. And much of that consists of saying that something that's crazy is in fact normal, or it didn't happen, or this was love and it wasn't hate. And so you live in this distorted universe, trying to desperately manage the messages you get from the back of your brain, which is like, oh my God, the world is in danger and I'm a worthless piece of crap. Because you do get, if somebody does something to you as a kid, the kids are totally egocentric, as in narcissistic personality disorder, but you're a kid, it's normal. So everything that happens to you is because of me. And so if mom tortures me, this must mean that I'm a terrible human being. And that feeling of I'm a terrible human being pursues you, and it really infects your relationships and your capacities until you go back and you visit that kid, as Darrell so beautifully does, with Michelle's help and his doctor's help, and you see what that kid went through, and you get a feeling of self-compassion for, oh my God, that poor kid. Look what he had to do with. It's amazing. All he did was try to commit suicide 15 times. I'm surprised that that's all he did. Because when you really realize what that kid had to deal with, you are left with nothing but admiration for that amazing child that somehow survived by hook or by crook. Whatever means he or she could mobilize.
What each of you have mentioned, or Michelle, you have one more thing to add?
Well, Bessel, can I quote you? I want to quote what you say in the movie, which helps so many people. When I asked you the definition of trauma, and you said, when your reality is not seen or known, that is the trauma. And that line alone has helped millions and millions.
I'm really glad.
Yeah.
And so we need each other. And we need to validate each other. If the world about you says, no, nothing is happening here, no, nobody beat anybody up, no, nobody molested anybody, no, it's perfectly normal, you start thinking you're crazy. And so we need each other to validate the reality of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
I want to build on that. Each of you have talked about how trauma impacts the relationships around us that are closest to us in some ways, and how that kind of goes on generation to generation. However, the theme of connection and relationships is also a big part of the healing process that, Michelle, you highlighted so poignantly in the film. Specifically, I wanted to write down, like, Darrell, your therapist, your childhood friend, Whoopi Goldberg, as well as your childhood maid, Murtis. All of these different people that came into your life were really close to you and somehow part of your healing process. I'm sure so many more as well. Are there any of those relationships, Darrell, that stood out to you?
All of them, of course. That's why
they're in the film. Yeah.
Well, they're in the movie.
Dr. Vanderkolk, what is the healing mechanism behind connection relationships for those with trauma histories?
Well, we are biologically connected to each other. We don't exist as individuals. Our whole mind-brain existence is an interpersonal existence. That's what we have brains for. So we're made to relate to people, to fit in with people, to work with people, exactly what we're doing right now. And we're made to feel at home with each other. And so that's our goal. And it's so hard right now with COVID. It just makes it so hard for people to connect with each other sometimes. But we need to feel seen. We need to feel known. We need to feel acknowledged. We need to be part of something. People will do anything to belong, including belonging to crazy places. I'd be willing to sacrifice my reality in order to become acceptable by the larger group.
Ooh, that's good, Bessel. Can I add on to that?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, if you didn't have proper attachment as a baby, like, I love Ed Tronick's work with the mothers and the babies, where you see a little baby and then you see the mother kind of look away, and then you see the baby freak out because the mother is now looking away, but then the mother comes back and is attuned to the baby. And, I see that today. If I, in my relationship, if I feel I'm being seen, I feel so good, right? If I feel I'm being seen, if I'm being heard, if I'm being looked in the eye. But as soon as somebody their eye starts to wander off and they're not really there, and I'm not getting the attunement, I can really get triggered back to that little baby. And I mean, I was in an incubator for the first month. I didn't get that attunement when I was little and growing up. There was a lot of, my family was overwhelmed. But what's so powerful for me in the healing is that I can, in my present relationships, if I get sort of, we call it, if you're hysterical, it's historical, we have this saying. And so if I'm just like really, really, really upset, I go, you know what? I don't think this is about the person in front of me. And I think I'm going to go, meditate or talk to my therapist or a friend or sit and take a walk or, and I go inside and I regulate and I calm that whether the little baby down and myself down. But it is so powerful how we still carry all those different parts, of ourselves. But then as soon as I'm regulated, what I used to do is try to get, when I was deregulated and triggered, I would go toward you and be like, please regulate me.
Right.
I didn't know I was saying that. I didn't know I was doing that. I thought it was the other person's responsibility. And now I realize as soon as I feel that way, it's my responsibility to go regulate myself. And I know how to do that through Bessel's research, through a meditation, through, there's so many healing modalities where I can calm myself down. And I just think it's so powerful. It's been such a powerful healing for me to understand that.
Yeah. to be present with yourself and to be able to give yourself what you need in that moment. But I'm also hearing you say that the relationships you have are more powerful and more connected when people can be really present with you as well, and how important it is for us to be present to one another when we're building relationships and maintaining.
Healing. I mean, sometimes I forget, because I'll think, I got to think of the right thing to say to help to fix this person, and I forget. No. There's nothing more powerful than saying, I'm going to sit with you. Can I just sit with you? Can I sit with you while you cry? Or just looking in their eyes and deeply listening. That's all I want. And that is extremely healing.
When we are so present with each other, we can actually see each other. And that goes back to this idea of being seen and being heard. And actually, that brings me to a question I have for you, Darrell, which there seemed to be a turning point that was highlighted in the film for your healing process, to have a doctor who really, really saw you. I think Dr. and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, Dr. Cotby. Is that how you say his name? He said, it's not your fault you are this way because of something that happened to you, which you also echoed at the beginning today.
Yeah, and what is the thing, Michelle, the quote by Oprah when she says, when I see someone doing aberrant behavior, I don't ask. What is the quote? I don't ask. Well,
yeah, when she learned about this from Dr. Bruce Perry and read the ACE study, she said all her schools in Africa are trauma informed. Her company is now trauma informed. And when she sees somebody acting out, when she calls them into the office, if she wants to talk to them, she doesn't say what's wrong with you. She says, what happened to you?
Yeah. I mean, I used to feel like if someone had put a gun to my head and said, I'm going to tell you what happened, but then I'm going to have to shoot you, I would have given that some serious thought, But the killer, I remember I went to see the play My Secret Garden about this child that was misled and given this whole phony version about what life is and his life and what it isn't. And he's got all these problems, but there are people who know what's wrong with him. And they're choosing not to help. The phrase, one hit it, the other did it, comes to mind, But listen, bills and taxes have to be paid, and children have to be fed and taught, and we grow up and we try to get by. But it's weird, like my father on his deathbed said, I let my anger be more important to me than my children. Well, that was a hallelujah chorus moment for me. It was a hallelujah chorus moment for me when a doctor could look at me and go, and sort of tongue in cheek go through the usual suspects. Oh, you're psychotic. Oh, you're this. Oh, you're that. You've got a chemical imbalance. You've got a beta that needs blocking. Right? Instead of going, of course, none of that is true. You're like this because of something that happened. That's my favorite thing. I mean, I was going to say if I have a tombstone, but I don't think I'm going to have a tombstone. But I would put mental illness is not an airborne virus. That's the best thing I ever learned when I heard you're this way because of an event and a series of events and a story. And in that story, you're the only one with no power. And you were injured.
It's very healing to be able to reframe your perspective in that way, right? And to externalize all the shame and the guilt that doesn't need to be there.
It's beginning, but then you still have to learn all kind of stuff that you did not learn back then.
Yes.
And so there's a lot of catching up to do.
Yeah.
You need to, when you have parents who look at you and know you, you don't have to learn to trust people because that's a part of your upbringing. If your parents abuse you, you don't know what it feels like to be in a trusting relationship. You need to learn it. And that's not an easy thing to learn, to open yourself up and to get, I'm not going to get criticized or hurt for this. But I have to be cautious at the same time because some people may hurt me and criticize me. How do I make that distinction? It's a very complex learning process.
Yeah.
Learning, I mean, the therapeutic process, I think a lot of people think, oh, you just go to therapy and you get better. I think it's a misnomer. It takes so much effort. And
you learn at so many levels.
Yeah, I like to say, I had a friend call last night that I hadn't talked to in a long time, and he's realized he had physical abuse and sexual abuse, and he's so eager to get better, and please help me find the right doctor, and he's actually doing yoga and meditation. And I said, you know what, you're doing really well. You're doing really well. But please know that healing is not a one-time event. Mm-hmm. This healing is a process. Healing from trauma is a process. It's a lifelong process. It's a day at a time process. It's a minute at a time process. And it is a practice. It's a practice. And I mean, I can feel great one day, and then the next day something could trigger me and I could be right back terrified. And need to just continue to practice learning how to regulate. And so that was really, really crucial to understand.
Yeah. Someone explained to me that it was like emptying the ocean with a bucket, and you feel good as long as you're pitching that water. Mm-hmm. As long as you're just, yesterday I did a cognitive therapy exercise, stuff like that. I mean, when I get really overwrought, the doctor I'm working with now we do this thing called It's Real, But It's Not True. When I'm feeling frightened and overwhelmed, and we sit down and we write it out. Mm-hmm. Write it out. What happened? What do I think about it? What do I believe about it? Mm-hmm. What are the consequences of the belief? And then we can dispute the belief, because the sky isn't falling yet. I mean, I'll tell you, Michelle remembers a few months ago, the power went out on the Upper West Side. And I assumed we were under cyber attack or something. I was pretty freaked out. So I called my friend, who's a very famous journalist, also a friend of Michelle's. And I was like, listen, I was a little freaked out this morning. I was thinking that there was a cyber attack. And he said, well, for once, you're not making this up. I mean, that's the world we're living in right now. Mm-hmm. And mass graves and all the rest of it. Mm-hmm. And I have a book here. I have books with cognitive therapy stick figure exercises where the stick figures talk to one another. And the purpose of the book, it's not what's happened to you, it's what you tell yourself about what happened. A thing is neither good or bad, but thinking makes it so, from Hamlet. Like, this is all stuff I could have never thought of myself. And I have a lot, I don't know if Michelle's ever felt this, but I have these feelings where I go, wait, why do I got to learn this shit? What do I have to learn this for? Mm-hmm. Why do I have to learn what Martin Luther King thought forgiveness was? Why do I have to learn what Jesus and Gandhi thought forgiveness was? Mm-hmm. Why can't I just go eat a burger? Mm-hmm. and watch a game? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I go, all right.
Yeah. Well, you can do both. You can eat the burger and you can do the work.
Yeah. Well, thank God those people lived, so that there was so much you could learn from them. But thank God.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned cognitive behavior therapy, and I know that has proven to be effective in treating trauma. Mm-hmm. And something, though, I mean, your book, Dr. Vanderkolk, speaks to you directly. Body Keeps the Score, which unfortunately so often providers, either primary care providers or even mental health practitioners, overlook, is the physical manifestation or the somatization that happens in the body secondary to trauma. And can you give some tips?
Primary to trauma.
Yes.
We are bodies. Huh? So we live in a society where we sort of ignore our bodies and we firm it up and we do stuff to make it attractive. but we're very, very disembodied people, more and more so. Like when I grew up, we were always singing in school and singing camps. People don't sing anymore.
Well, I do.
Good.
Not here.
We are bodies that are synced with other people. And, when you talk about phonics work, when you look at small babies where it all starts, they don't have any cognition. They just form a map of the world on the basis of what their body feels like and how their body is in sync with other people. And it has to do with rhythms. The basic source of pleasure and joy in human beings is to be in sync with each other, to move together, the tone of voice, their rhythms, etc., etc. And that's a foundational issue. And that's all back in that housekeeping of your brain. So when you feel comfortable with people, you are in sync together. And that core issue of being out of sync happens to all traumatized people. And they have to do something to get in sync. That means you have to work with your body. And first of all, you have to allow yourself to feel your body. And when you're traumatized, you have all these sensations of heartbreak and gut wrench that sit over here. And that's where emotions are experienced. And you go like, I don't want to feel this. Let me take some alcohol. Let me take some drugs. Let me do some long distance running to make those feelings go away. But in order to really feel what you feel inside and get in sync with people, you need to be in touch with your body. Which,
even though it's uncomfortable.
Interesting. Well, it depends on what culture you live in.
Yeah.
So you go to Africa and people jump together. And you go to China, and in every market in China, people are doing Qigong and Tai Chi, and they move together. You come to Chicago and nobody does it in public because we're a disembodied culture. You say, oh, working with the body, that's crazy. Well, it depends on if you're in North America in 2020. That's crazy. But from my point of view, it's crazy not to work with the body because we are bodies.
Darrell, you said you had something that you want to say?
Yeah, I read a question here. Wondering if you feel addiction is always the result of trauma. There it is.
I'm a scientist, so I'd like to say, I feel something, but I also know something. And what we know is that there's a 4,700% correlation between child abuse and drug abuse. I imagine you can become a drug abuser without child abuse, but it's very hard.
Addiction is directly addressed in the film, Darrell.
Yeah, because it when you get into the question of opiates, we can have an automobile accident and do opiates for a month and get hooked on opiates, right? So that's the one that always throws me off, right? But typically, I mean, the 12-step environments and the mental health programs I've been through, it seems like everyone's got a story, right, Michelle?
Yeah, I mean, Dr. Gabor Mate, who we all know and love here, who wrote a book called In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, and he's been a guest on our series. We asked him, is there any case where there's an addict that does not have trauma? And his opinion, and I call him the addict whisperer, his opinion is no, 100%. And he always says, just give me 3 minutes with the person. Because in his definition of addiction, I mean, he says there's hundreds of, thousands of kinds of addictions. I mean, he was addicted to classical music. And, that trauma is an internal wound, and that if you ask any addict, why are you doing it? It's all for a good reason. It's for us, it's the solution because we don't have another solution to calm my body down, to take the edge off, to feel relief, to feel relaxed. Like those are all good things to strive for. It's just that when negative consequences start to happen and I become a slave to that drink, that drug, or that, what did he say, Darrell? He spent like $100,000 on classical music in a week or something like that. When it becomes a negative consequence, that's when I have to look at it and find other ways find other ways to calm my body down. I mean, about a couple of months ago, I had flashbacks of a trauma I had never remembered before. And I called Bessel, I called Darrell, and thanked him and said, I would never even understand what was happening to me if I didn't make this film and learn from the flashbacks you were having. And I was having like body spasms. I mean, it was trying to come out of me after 35 years of recovery and working on this stuff and thinking I had remembered everything. And I called Bessel, and and I was really I was scared about what was going on. And he said, go for a walk. Like he just told me to exercise in that moment and exercise my, exhaust my, what'd you say, Bessel? Exhaust my nervous system?
Oh, probably, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I'm telling you, it helped me so much to just, I mean, I did other things and I talked to, some professionals, but really what helped me so much was that exercise and music. I did a lot of exercise and music.
And your automatic reaction of calling people who you trust.
Yes.
Hearing a voice on the other end of the line who says, I hear you. That's the beginning. That's who we are as social creatures. When we get distressed, we call out. And we ask somebody to help us. And when we meet somebody who has a kind voice and a kind face, we go like, somebody is there for me.
Yes.
That's still a primate nature. We're creatures, they belong together.
Yeah.
And of course, the other thing is being touched. The issue of touch is also left out of the mental health profession, but the primary mode in which we feel safe is by somebody touching us and touching our naked bodies. That's how it starts off as little babies. Somebody holds you and rocks you and sings to you. And hopefully as an adult, you still have somebody who can hold you and rock you and sing to you because those needs never go away.
And what you're really getting at is we talk so much about the mind-body relationship in psychology, but really the mind and the body are one. And that interdependence is
psychologists still make that distinction.
Yes.
As neuroscientists, I don't anymore. Like it's all about that creature.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think.
So what? Can I ask a quick question about that? So now during COVID, when we can't hug each other, what would you say to people who live alone? They're not in a relationship, and what would you say for them in terms of being touched?
I wonder what. For one thing, I'm astounded by the power of Zoom. Stephen Porges talks about it. Said that we live off voices and faces. Basically, the back of the brain gets regulated by meeting a voice and seeing a face that calms us down. That's our core nature. It's astonishing to me how comforting it is to talk to you guys right now. It's almost as if it's real. And I talk to friends every day. And it feels almost as good as real life. So it's not bad. I also am married to somebody who I love to be with, so I get touched, and vice versa. I'm very curious what young people do who don't get touched. I think it's totally against nature. And I wonder how many young people are able to keep all the protections in place because the urge to be touched and to touch is so primal. It's like food.
This actually leads us into one of the questions that came up so far from the audience. We're talking about this pandemic, and we're all being traumatized collectively in some sense of the word right now. And especially for people with trauma histories, it's uniquely difficult. And how can we stay resilient and supportive of others during these times? And I'll say, especially for those with trauma histories.
Well, I think that uncertainty. I was talking to Gwen, Dr. Cotby's the clinical associate, and she wants to come on and do a show just about uncertainty, how that is so triggering for trauma survivors and for I think having a routine is really, really important. I think the practice of being in the present moment, that's what works for me. When I get really scared and I start to spin out and I feel I'm going to go down a rabbit hole, or I'm projecting, I wonder what's going to happen, and, you know, wonder what's not going to happen. Sometimes turning the news off helps, sometimes turning it on. Yeah. But when I learn to meditate and practice being in this present moment, and I say, you know, put my feet are on the ground, my butt is in the chair, I'm here, I'm looking at you. We're just being in the moment, being here in the now, and finding meditation. There's so many guided meditations about in the now. You know, Eckhart Tolle and Ram Dass and Sharon Salzberg and you know, Tara Brach and Jack Kornfield. There's, you know, I would say that is a wonderful tool, is to do a guided meditation to get into the present moment. That's what's helpful.
Thank you for sharing that. I love these tips. Some of these I practice myself. Darrell, I'm curious what you do to take care of yourself, especially right now during the pandemic.
Well, I live in New York City now. I was living in Los Angeles, and I make sure that I have some conversation, hopefully with someone who I'm familiar with and who likes me, but I have a human interaction.
Yeah.
At least one a day. And that means out on a park bench, on the stoop, take a walk, meet at a diner. You know, in New York, everybody talks to everybody. And I moved back here to the Upper West Side, and people talk to me all the time. It was very strange because Michelle knows this. When I was in LA, I started getting sores on my face. Symptoms of solitary confinement, like a nervous system like an immune and nervous system. When I wasn't allowed to act like a mammal, I got sick. You know,
so
I'm still learning to walk. I walked fine pre-COVID. I come back to New York with this vitamin D deficiency, and I'm walking again finally, and the sores have gone away. But I still look because I talk to people all the time here.
Yeah, we meet at the diner at least once a week, but we probably check in almost.
I love that.
Sit on a bench.
Because people talk about New York as this tough place. I love New York, and every time I'm there, I have lovely interactions with people. Minor ones at the lunch counter, minor little things here. But it's very deeply interpersonal. New York is grossly underrated in terms of the impersonal place.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I've gotten really healthy in New York. You know, I've lost 12 pounds. I don't eat bad food back. You know, when I got in LA, it was so horrible. And, you know, when you wake up and you go, oh, no, oh my God, another day by myself. Another day in this silence. A dust ball roaming aimlessly across the floor. No one there, alone.
Right.
So I would take Uber up to the Sunset Boulevard and buy every Italian dish there was. I mean, there's nothing wrong with Italian food, but, you know, I like the bread. Bread. I mean, that happened all the time.
See, the challenge is right now, it's easy for a person like me, who has been around for a long time, has a whole bunch of friends. So there's plenty of people to reach. I think the challenge is, how do you form community right now when you have had no community before? And I think that's a huge issue.
The isolation.
This issue that you need to go to a therapist to do it. And that's really wrong. You know, I think the 12-step model is much better, where you can go somewhere and find people who are willing to talk and to be willing to be there without you having to pay a lot of money or something. And so I'm really, through our foundation, we're really trying very hard to set up peer support systems where you do the stuff for each other, and you don't go to somebody who has a PhD to do it for you, you know?
The power of human connection and how important that is. And certainly we know it's one of the top protective factors when we're treating folks as well. And so,
deep protective factor.
Yeah, it's so important. So I'm so glad, Darrell, that you have more social connection now and more ability to talk with others in New York. That's awesome.
I've been reading for a long time about the law of mutuality, the law of shared experience. I'm fascinated by the subject because when I hang out with a group of people who are like me, and we have a bite to eat, I can come home and be symptom free for a couple of hours.
Great.
I mean, that's a superpower.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah.
Social connection as a superpower.
Yeah. Yeah.
For
You
someone like-
that when we went to the diner, but now there's so many Zoom meetings, like Bessel was talking about, 12-step. Like I could go to a meeting in Italy right now, I could go to a meeting all over the world. But I would say also to really take advantage of Zoom, whether it's 12-step meetings, and there's so many different kinds of them.
Yoga classes. Yep.
Yeah. Yoga classes, groups, be together in a group.
I love it so much. And I hope that we can continue this and that, I know it's pivoted with virtual, but the closest approximation we can to maintain those. We have time for one final question, which came up from the audience, which I really think is an important one to get through. And how can we help children who suffer from abuse?
That's sort of
I know it's a huge question.
1 minute for the answer.
Yeah, hurry up. Wrap it up, Bessel. That's a big question.
It is a big question.
It's all about safety. It's all about making. It's also about pleasure. It's about doing things that are interesting and fun. Gives you a sense of agency. I tell therapists the most important tool in your office is not your Kleenex box, but your beach ball. And to just toss a ball to somebody and to catch it and to throw it around and to play and to do something weird and to try to do something new. It's about play, really.
Play.
Yeah, play. Reciprocity. So Darrell talks about mutuality. Our favorite term these days is reciprocity. And we do it together. We create a new reality together. And what do you feel like doing? What happens when you toss this ball this way? And it's about rhythms, about movement, being in sync.
Being present.
And creating fun.
Yeah.
Creating
fun.
I would say, because it's a wonderful question. So we're not making fun of the question. It's just, are you talking about a child who's being a specific case where a child's being abused and you don't know what to do, or there's just so many different circumstances?
Yeah.
But I would say in the movie, Darrell did go to a doctor when his mom had abused him. And the doctor, if that doctor was trauma informed, okay, that doctor would not have believed his mother when the mother said he fell on his bike, and that's why he's bleeding internally. So I think that doing more talks like these, learning about trauma-informed care, reading Bessel's book, and then, that we need to educate each other. We need to have a system that is trauma-informed so we can truly serve our communities and serve that individual child.
Thank you, Michelle. That is really powerful because it is a systemic issue and we can help at those other points of intervention. I know we're about out of time, but I do want to make sure I'm thanking each of you. Thank you, Dr. Vander Kolk. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Darrell. Thank you for this talk, for sharing your story, for spreading the word, for the film, for everything that you're doing to advocate in this space, also with legislation. It's incredible. And I hope that more people will be inspired from this, not only to get help from themselves, but to also pay it forward in a similar fashion. And also to learn more about the film, please watch it if you haven't. It is amazing. Watch it again if you have. crackedupmovie.com. crackedupmovie.com.